So as we've been coming up to Thanksgiving here at Oak Arbor, we've been looking at a theme in the Word, which is a theme of unexpected gratitude. And we've looked at a few different stories where people in the Word offer their thanks or their praise to the Lord in times where we might not think of giving thanks to the Lord. And today on Thanksgiving, I want to share a story that follows this theme of a time that Jesus himself gives thanks. And if any of us were in Jesus' shoes in this story, I wonder how many of us would think to give thanks at the moment that he does in this story. So I'd like to begin by reading it. And this is a well-known story. It comes from the Gospel of John, and it's one of the few stories that actually appears in all four of the Gospels. There's a version of it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so we're going to read the version from John this morning. And as I read it, I would invite us to pay attention to when the Lord gives thanks in this story. This is from John chapter 6. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as many as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." And therefore they gathered them up, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." So in this story, Jesus goes across the Sea of Galilee, and he goes sort of out into the middle of nowhere, and he goes up on a mountain. But this big crowd of people, this crowd of 5,000 people, comes to see him. And as they're coming, he sees them all coming, and he asks one of his disciples, "Where can we get enough bread for all of these people?" And he says, even if we spent 200 denarii, even if we spent a lot of money, it would be really hard to have enough food to feed all of these people. We might be able to get enough that everyone could have just a little bit of bread. And then another disciple says, "Well, there's a boy here who has 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish, but there's no way that that's going to be able to feed this entire crowd." And Jesus responds by telling them to have everyone sit down. And then he takes these 5 loaves of bread and these 2 small fish, and he gives thanks for them. Now, if we pause right here, it makes sense to us that Jesus would be able to give thanks because he's the Lord, and he knows all things, and he knows that he's about to perform this incredible miracle and feed all 5,000 people. But how many of us, if we were in Jesus' shoes, would be giving thanks at this point? If we didn't have enough food for everyone, would we feel gratitude? Would we feel grateful for that? I mean, imagine if on a day like today, on Thanksgiving, you had a big crowd of people come to your house expecting a big Thanksgiving feast, and all you have is a couple loaves of bread. Would we feel grateful and say, well, thank goodness we have this little bit of food? No, we'd probably freak out and think there's not enough food for everyone. Everyone's going to go home hungry. I'm going to be such a bad host, and no one's going to have a good Thanksgiving. I need to have enough food for everyone. And yet Jesus here gives thanks for this little bit of food that they have. And after he gives thanks for it, he gives it to his disciples. And his disciples take it and they give it to this big crowd of 5,000 people. And miraculously, there's enough for everyone to eat as much as they want. And when they're done, Jesus tells them to go and gather up all the leftovers. And when they do that, in the end, they are left with 12 baskets full of leftovers from this food. So this little bit of food that Jesus gave thanks for was not only enough to feed all 5,000 of these people, but it was enough to give them all of these leftovers. What a powerful story. And believe it or not, the Lord tells us that this miracle that happens in this story can happen in our lives. This same thing can happen to all of us. But we aren't able to multiply natural food the way that Jesus does in this story, but we can have this same miracle take place with spiritual food, with what is represented by the bread and the fish. In the teachings for the new church, we're told that the bread and the fish represent the goods and the truths that we receive from the Lord. They represent the teachings that the Lord gives us and the ways that we can use those teachings to love other people. And we're told in the teachings for the new church that breaking and giving bread to other people, the way that Jesus and his disciples do in this story, that represents something that's called mutual love. And mutual love is simply the kind of love that exists when two or more people love each other. And there is an incredible, miraculous power in mutual love. I want to turn now to the teachings for the new church and share with you all a passage that talks about the power of mutual love in heaven. This is from the work Secrets of Heaven, number 2057. It says, "The mutual love of heaven consists in loving one's neighbor more than oneself. The whole of heaven presents the image of a single human being, since mutual love received from the Lord brings all the inhabitants together. The result is that the happiness of everyone in general is communicated to each individual in particular, and the happiness of each individual is communicated to everyone. The basic form of heaven, then, is such that everyone there is a kind of center point. Everyone is a kind of center to which all the happiness of everyone else is communicated, in accord with all the variations of that love, which are countless. People who reciprocate or who return the love of others find their supreme happiness in the opportunity to share with others what they themselves receive, and to do so from the heart." I'm going to read that sentence one more time. People who reciprocate the love of others find their supreme happiness in the opportunity to share with others what they themselves receive, and to do so from the heart. As a consequence, the sharing goes on perpetually and eternally, so that the larger the Lord's kingdom grows, the more the happiness of the individual members grows. What a powerful teaching. It's talking about the power of mutual love, being loving other people more than ourselves, or prioritizing caring about other people above just caring about ourselves. And it talks about how when we do this, when you genuinely are in a state of mutual love, then the joy and the happiness that we get isn't just from the love that we receive from other people, but we actually find happiness and fulfillment in giving love away to other people. And think about this. If you have two people and they care more than anything about helping the other person feel loved, then they get to have what they want. They get to feel happiness and joy by loving the other person. But in addition to that, they don't just receive that happiness and that delight, but they also get to receive on top of that the joy of feeling being loved in return. And so that little bit of love that they've shared with that other person has now multiplied into even more love. And if you widen this out to a scale of a community, if everyone focuses on loving other people and what they can do to love and serve other people, then they can find happiness and fulfillment in doing those things. But in addition to that, they also get to feel the added joy of feeling the love of their community coming back to them. And so I think today on Thanksgiving, we can think of Jesus giving thanks for this small amount of food that he had at the beginning of this story. And we can recognize that we can be grateful to the Lord, not just for the things that we have or the things that we have received from other people, but on a day like Thanksgiving, we can give thanks to the Lord for the opportunities that we have to love other people. And I would encourage all of us to focus on this today. I want all of us to think of at least one way today that we can show someone else that we love them. Maybe it's sitting down and talking with someone that we haven't talked to in a while. Maybe it's helping to cook the meal tonight. Maybe it's playing with our brothers and sisters so that mom and dad can focus on the meal. Or maybe it's volunteering to do the dishes after dinner without being asked. Any of these kinds of things, when we focus not on just what we can get out of the day, but if we focus on what we can give to other people, then we can find incredible amounts of joy and happiness in the use that we're serving. And when we all think this way, when we all focus on loving other people, then that love is able to be multiplied and it's able to grow so that just like the disciples at the end of the story, we can gather up 12 baskets full of all of the leftover love and goodness that comes out of it. Amen. Please rise for a blessing and the closing of the word.